This is the Leadership in Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now.
I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent.
When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology, and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation.
I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Emerging Tech series of the Leadership and Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Gavin Savage, and on this podcast we speak to technology founders, executives and leaders from the world of InsurTech. This is the final episode of 2023, sorry. And I'm very lucky and excited to be joined by the CTO of Attune, Azeem Ansar. Azeem, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on the last episode. This is great.
Yeah, got a bit ahead of myself. We're not quite into 2024 yet, but by the time this episode goes live, I guess we will be.
Yeah, that's right.
But look, thank you for coming on. I know you're super busy, both in your business and personal life, having a newborn. So I appreciate it's all very hectic for you. And as I say, really appreciative of your time. But
No, thank you. Thanks for bearing with me. This is great.
And before we begin, I think always a nice place to start on this podcast. I was keen for you to introduce yourself, a little bit about your career background, how you got, I guess going way back, how you got into tech, and
Sure.
how you've ended up navigating into the world of InsurTech with Attune.
Yeah, that sounds great. So yeah, like you mentioned, I'm our CTO at Attune. I manage our engineering team, as well as our product team at Attune. Although I work very closely with our product partner. His name's Gates Mouse. But yeah, my journey into tech, I guess, has been long and winding, I suppose. I'll start from the very, very early days. I've always been into computers, into programming. I was surrounded by software in some form or fashion from a very young age. I have an older brother who spent, how do I put it? He, I guess, like really kind of was a big influence for me when it came to thinking about software and thinking about computers. He studied math and computer science eventually. So I was always kind of surrounded by computers, early internet user. First programming job was in high school. So like kind of always had tech in the back of my mind. I also studied math in college and then minored in physics and computer science. And so my mind was always sort of technically geared in some form or fashion. I took a quick pit stop after school. Went to school in Philadelphia, I went to Penn. I took a quick pit stop after school in Wall Street and investment banking, which is kind of was different and learned a lot there. Learned that it was probably not for me, but also learned some really important just skills like working hard, work ethic, that sort of stuff. And then shifted from into tech from there and got a chance to work at some really interesting companies like Facebook, like Venmo. Was working on the incubator that launched Tinder many years ago, and found my way to Attune after Facebook. Part of the reason why was I was thinking about new sorts of companies to start. I started looking down the avenue of insurance broadly. I was playing around with sort of like a consumer idea with a good friend of mine in the insurance, sort of like a mix of insurance and lending. And then realize, okay, that's probably not the idea to get into, but I still think insurance is pretty interesting. I spent some time working on small business pages at Facebook and got a lot deeper on data and attributes having to do with small businesses. And so when I met some of the folks who were working on Attune, I met James, our CEO, the company was being like partially incubated by Two Sigma, so I met some of the folks there. I got really intrigued, and so came on board.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. Awesome. Great. Great. I never knew you worked with an investment bank. I don't know if that's on your profile. Maybe that's
Yeah, this
missing.
was a
But
while ago.
you don't
Another
strike
life ago. A
you don't
lifetime
strike
ago.
me you don't strike me
Yeah.
as a type.
Yeah. Different life, I would say. To some
Yeah.
people. But
Yeah.
like I said, I will say two things I really appreciate from those days. One, work ethic and learning to work really hard. I feel like there's nothing like that mode for working hard. And two, this is going to sound silly, but I really think it's been valuable for me is learning how to use spreadsheets, learning how to use Excel, learning how to model things out. It actually comes in handy in all sorts of ways all throughout life. So it's really
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, certainly, there's a whole other language in itself there. Yeah, the kind of
hard.
trend as well. Someone that studies maths and majors in maths and minors in computer science. We see that a lot. In terms of the progression into engineering. I don't know if that's in the last kind of 10, 20 years, but it's the common kind of theme. Some of the best engineers, because someone once told me that engineers are not engineers that are good at problem solving. They're problem solvers that just happen to be good at engineering. So kind of that
Yeah.
maths background plays up to that.
That really resonates with me. I mean, I can't say I was ever the best at math or great at math, but I really enjoyed it. I still do. And I think the thing that's really fun about it is you get to spend time thinking about problems and how to solve them. And ideally, over a period of time, you rack up all of these different tactics and tools and mental models for how to solve problems. And that's kind of fun. So I don't see that as any different from what we do today. It's just maybe different context, but same idea in some ways.
Yeah. And Azim, just for the listeners and for those that may not know who Attune is, would you mind giving a brief description of the business, what the mission and the vision is, please?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So at Attune, our job is to make insurance as easy as it should be for small businesses. And I think the easy as it should be is a critical phrase in that sentence because we believe strongly that um, that brokers are an important trusted advisor for small businesses. They're a critical intermediary, the same way that a real estate agent is critical for buying a house. A lawyer is critical for managing legal issues. You wouldn't treat yourself. You would rely on a doctor to help treat you. Like we think an insurance broker is so important to help a small business owner navigate the various risks that they might face day to day. So our focus is to empower that broker to service their small business clients, their insureds better. And there are, I would say, two different axes along which Attune does that. One is to make the process as fast as possible. We focus a lot on speed, that we can help brokers get through uh, quoting and binding insurance for their small business insured as quickly as possible. And it doesn't just stop there. Servicing is a big part of that too. And then the second leg or axis would be access. Sorry, not to say the same word in two different ways, but we want to make sure that we can expand access to all of the different kinds of products that a small business might care about, and that a broker that we can empower a broker to sell to their small business customers. So that's us in a nutshell. Today, our flagship product is BOP. We have a few different digitally integrated products through through carriers that we work closely with. But BOP is sort of fully homegrown and owned by us. We just recently shipped and launched a new workers' comp product in South Carolina that we're slowly expanding out. And I think we'll continue to expand our brokers' access to more and more products. That's us in a nutshell. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of people that will be listening to this can absolutely resonate with that. They're insurance professionals. Everyone, of course, listens to this is from the world of insurance. And I think, to be honest, most will know who Attune are. There's been
Sure.
a lot of recent positive activity in terms of bigger picture stuff, but breaking it down there, I think it makes perfect sense. The question that I was kind of thinking was, that that aspects of you increasing speed and services for brokers to help the insurance. What is the ever evolving, you mentioned BOP like that, enhancing that user experience for brokers and small businesses seeking insurance coverage? What's the, I don't want to say USP, but to a degree, I think maybe like the secret sauce, if you like, behind enhancing that user experience, because maybe now it's probably more a crowded market than when it was when you guys started.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, I think there are a couple things. I think early on, research was really important to us. And by research, I don't just mean going out and doing surveys and things like that, but literally sitting alongside our brokers and learning what we could, either virtually or otherwise. I remember a quote, I can't remember which agency, unfortunately, but I remember a quote from a couple years back where we heard from an agent that, hey, like no one does this, no one sits in our office, no one spends time just like watching us do our work with the other carriers or other MGAs that we might work with, and this is a really amazing thing. And I think it was so novel. It may not be as novel anymore, but it was so novel at the time to just really plug ourselves in to the workflow of our brokers. And when I say ourselves, I mean our tech team. It wasn't just like the revenue folks on the sales side, or I mean, they spend time with our brokers. That makes sense. But
Yeah.
having engineers and product folks and designers sit alongside our brokers was definitely new to them. And particularly if you think about the brokers that we're most focused on, we're focused on a lot of smaller retail agencies who we want to help empower and help them grow. And so I think this was a really cool thing for them to see. So I think research matters. COVID disrupted that a bit for us, and I think we're getting back to that now. But spending time listening to our brokers, thinking deeply about their needs, not shooting from the hip, but trying to derive backwards from what we're hearing and build intuition on what brokers care about, what problems they're facing, and how we can improve their workflows, I think was a big part of it. So that's one.
Mm.
Two, I think is just the data. I think having as wide of a telemetry as possible on what our brokers are experiencing, observing what our brokers are experiencing, every entry point we can use, I think has been helpful. So everything from the data that we collect in our portal to trying to quantify the conversations that we have with them as much as possible to seeing what insights we can glean from our servicing interactions with them. I think that has been really empowering. And again, there's nothing novel there, but I think doing it consistently and trying to get better and better at how we interpret our data is an important factor that I think influences that secret sauce. And the final thing I would say is just the speed. And this time, I mean, not just the speed of how our brokers get through our experience, but how fast are we getting at reacting, at learning, at shipping new features, new product ideas based on what they're telling us? How much faster are we getting at the core bread and butter? So if we're launching a new product, new insurance product to our brokers, are we getting faster at doing that? So I think paying attention to and trying to optimize the speed of how we run does have an impact on the experience that our brokers have. So I think these are some of the elements that our team really thinks about. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention the amazing job that our revenue and care teams do in bolstering and really grounding that customer experience. I mean, both of those teams are so great and spend so much time thinking about how to improve their interactions, both in onboarding and getting a new broker active, as well as servicing that broker. I'm super proud of both of those teams as well.
Wow.
So I think all of that together kind of, I guess, contributes to the secret sauce.
Yeah, no, that was it's just super interesting. I mean, the granular level of detail that you guys must have been able to get into by, I haven't heard of that, technology, from the side of what your business does, sitting next to the broker and really looking at that experience that they have on a day to day and being able to take that back to the workshop and and create, and products that are perfectly suited for them. As you say, we're not shooting from the hip and hoping that this may or may not make their life more efficient. Like you absolutely, completely fully know what they need and you can convert that into a solution. I
Yeah.
guess off the back of that, the thing that the thing that I was thinking is, what are those kind of challenges for the brokers? But probably the better way to ask that is by, you've came from, as you mentioned, Vimeo, everyone again in that really knows who they are and the journey and the exit that they went on. And of course, Facebook, what has surprised you the most about innovating in the commercial insurance space? And to probably add to that, what surprised you the most about working with brokers because you've got a real first-hand experience of those challenges in the insurance space?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. I think I was most surprised. I'll share a personal point of surprise more so than even a business point. I was most surprised by how much I would enjoy working on plumbing in quotes. And what I mean by that is, I mean, insurance is one of these things that people don't think about until it's too late. And then they need to pick their lives back up and figure out how to do that. And insurance is a critical part of that. And I think there are a lot of things that are enjoyable about that. Everything from the complexity that insurance has to, um, focusing, at least at the time, on a segment that was somewhat overlooked by software, which is brokers, especially our segment of brokers. So I think that was something that I was surprised by personally, that would be so much fun for me to spend time on. But maybe zooming out on the business context, I think there are a couple things. There are a couple things that are similar. Like I think it's always funny to draw on different experiences and see what things stay the same. At Venmo, we were very focused on payments, and although we didn't call things the same way, you're worried about some of the same kinds of things. Like it's fraud risk in the case of payments. Here, it's not exactly the same analogy, but loss ratio in the case of insurance. So there are these analogies that kind of span different contexts, both regulated industries in their own ways. So I think there are some things that are actually like pretty similar. And the most important thing that I think is similar is the power of software to be able to change the experience and be able to improve the experience that people have. When I was at Facebook, like I kind of alluded to earlier, I spent a decent amount of time thinking about data having to do with locations and data having to do with small businesses and small business pages. And so it was really interesting when I first started talking to James and some of the other folks who were involved with Attune at the time about, well, some of these data attributes could be useful for understanding the risk exposure of a business and better understanding how you might go about covering a business. So I think there are a lot of like sort of surprising connections there that I didn't necessarily expect. I think the other surprise that I faced was, maybe this is a bit of overlap, was how I had spent a lot of time on consumerish products, whether it was directly consumer or kind of consumer adjacent. And this is a little bit different. This felt more B2B like in a way, and it still does in many ways. And I think I mean, maybe that fact doesn't surprise me. The thing that surprises me is, well, people are still people. And a lot of the product thinking and tactics and tools can work in a lot of different contexts. And, suspending our intuition, making sure that we're listening to our users, making sure that we're spending time with them, making sure that we're empowering them to do the jobs that they need to do better, which in our case is very much our brokers. So I think, again, maybe it's not a surprise per se, but it was nice to see that a lot of those things, those concepts stay invariant. I don't know if that all makes sense. Maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's one thing I'd love to come back to, that, because I was thinking that, coming from the D2C world, the consumer world, or consumer adjacent to the world you're in now with Attune. It's the challenges there just for you personally as a CTO. Having to shift that mindset. I'd love to come back to, but you kind of mentioned on something with regards to what you were surprised at. You were surprised at how deeply, to a degree, software can still transform the insurance space. The kind of the technologies that you guys have sat down with the brokers, sat down with your partners and your clients, and came away and turned Attune into what it is now. Like the technologies that you've used to create that, I was kind of curious to know, what have been the greatest levers on the business's success, because again, you've built something. You've not just integrated. You've opted for the build versus buy option. You've clearly built something that benefits hundreds of thousands of brokers. Like, what do you think's been the greatest levers on the technology side of things since coming in and into where you are now?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. I mean, the first thing I'll say is I wouldn't say I'm a big believer in we work backwards from the user and we'll use whatever um, reliable tools we have to service the user. And it doesn't mean we won't build things from scratch. We have, like you mentioned, we've built many things from scratch. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the technology is in service of the user. And oftentimes that means that we don't need to build groundbreaking things. We just need to build the thing that works and that will service the customer. I would say there are a couple of kinds of, maybe the best way for me to answer it is what are the kinds of places where technology has been very useful
Yeah.
in making that true? And one is certainly the broker experience in our web app and our agent portal. I think we consistently get feedback that experience is a positive one by and large. Obviously, it's not always, depending on the situation, but by and large, a positive experience. And that largely derived from us just spending time with our brokers, trying to understand better what are the other services that they use? How do they use them? What do they not like about them? Where do they spend the most time? Well, it turns out they spend the most time in their email, in their inboxes. So what can we learn from that as it should translate to how we build our portal? So I think our agent portal has been a really important product and surface for us. I mean, we're constantly experimenting with and introducing new features in our agent portal that brokers can take advantage of. We've brought some of those like insights from other industries, like A/B testing on our portal and those sorts of things um, to get better at launching the right features to our brokers at large. So I think that's one segment of where various technologies have been useful. The second is in empowering our teams. So time invested in building internal tools for our revenue team, for our care team, is time well spent. Because, like I mentioned earlier, they are huge touch points, if not the primary touch points for the experience that brokers have. Insurance is still relationships. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And so, nor should it. And so empowering those relationships by being able to serve data back to our AMs in a more delightful way, being able to build better tools for our customer care team is a really important lever for us. So I would say that bucket of internal tooling in quotes, like in a variety of different ways, we've invested there to make the experience better. The third thing I'll say is maybe there's one or two other things. The process of building insurance products is complicated. That's another thing that surprised me, to go back to your question earlier. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised by that, but building a new insurance product from scratch is a very complex endeavor, not just technically, but the stakeholders who are involved. There's filings involved. I mean, there's so much that goes into building a new insurance product. And so getting better and better at optimizing every piece of that, whether it's document generation, whether it's rating, whether it's pricing, whether it's how we're taking in third-party data, that is quite an effort onto itself. And it's an effort that's borne fruit. I mean, like I mentioned, we just launched a new workers' comp product in less than 2 quarters. And I mean, if I told a carrier that would be wild. And our parent company was certainly impressed by that timeline as well. And it's a consequence of just spending time on figuring out how do we get every pillar of launching a new insurance product faster. And the final thing I'll say is I think now there are a variety of new tools and new technologies that we can take advantage of in
Mhm.
insurance. Insurance is all documents,
Yeah.
and that's what it is. And in this world of LLMs, and new AI tools, I mean, insurance is like the perfect candidate grounds for trying out some of these technologies. So there's a lot that we're experimenting with there. So
Mm. It's the ever-evolving standardizing of processes and documents,
exactly,
insurance,
correct. Yeah.
and everything you described there about, the levers of success, it really does speak to that InsurTech wave one, and we'll have to speak about waves of innovation. I've noticed in the last kind of 12 months personally being in the space, and that wave one for me and is really about creating applications, creating a more digital experience, creating something that feels nicer. But now we're in the second wave where things are focused on more niche areas. But I
Yes.
guess to my question is probably twofold, that because you guys have kind of almost dominated in your own field and your area, within what you guys provide to brokers now to be able to stand out. Like if you're coming to market with a tool that makes brokers' lives easier, we've got Attune here and we've got some others elsewhere. Like if you're coming into this market, like how do you stand out? Now because it's that you guys have done the heavy lifting from creating the user experience. You've given them apps, you've given them portals, you've sat down next to these guys. I mean, like, what do you think now? Someone coming in and trying to build upon, what do you need to do to stand out? Does AI have to fit into the strategy? You mentioned the LLMs there. Like, what do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I think I think there's two things that come to mind. One is you kind of alluded to narrowness. I mean, someone once said to me that insurance is an industry of niches, and I don't know if I fully agree with that, but I definitely see the merit in describing it that way. There are so many large pockets of insurance that have so much opportunity. And so kind of unlocking those pockets, I think, becomes really interesting. That's one way. I think the other way you also kind of alluded to, but I'll riff on just for a moment, is really deeply understanding a segment of the value chain and trying to provide useful tools and better tools for that segment of the value chain. So like brokers are a great example of that, where there are all kinds of brokers. There are small retail agencies, there are wholesalers, there are large brokerages. So I think each has their own problems and each has their own segments that they focus on, whether it's small business or mid-market or what have you. And I still think, and that's just within PNC, go beyond PNC, there's all kinds of
Mm,
problems to solve. So I think there's so many. I mean, the workflow of brokers hasn't been solved by any means. The workflows of these various elements in the value chain haven't been solved. There is so many kind of gnarly and complicated and weedy problems to deal with. Everything from how data gets transferred back and forth to how much time is someone spending going into their email and copy pasting something into their AMS to what does the back and forth between a broker and an underwriter look like today, and what could it look like in the future so that the broker can get a little bit more time back, and so can the underwriter. I mean, these problems sound mundane. I certainly don't think they are, and they have billions of dollars locked behind each of them. So I think there's a lot there in getting very deep on the workflows of a particular segment and just trying to make whoever's on the end of that segment's lives easier. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to stand out.
mm.
I don't know if that
It
makes
is,
sense.
yeah, absolutely, totally. I mean, the kind of immediate question was, do you have a kind of feeling? Because I know off camera we've known each other for a little while. Like, we've spoken about some areas of insurance where even you've personally thought about, in terms of where's kind of ripe for innovation or what's not quite been thought of? Are there any markets that you still feel in that commercial space? Because again, when we look back at where the focus has been in that wave one, it's been on the kind of more D2C side. I think now well, definitely now people are really focusing on that B2B. Probably B2B2C is the real sweet spot. But
Right.
like for you, just on a kind of more personal note, do you feel like there is any markets that are underserved in the market, or just particularly interesting markets to you that you think, there's a lot of good stuff that could and should be happening there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are a few things. One, I'll go back to sort of our brokers. I mean, ultimately, our job at Attune is to make sure that they have the products that they can have to sell. And everything that we build, tooling or otherwise, kind of revolves around that objective. Like we want to make sure that they have access to the products that they need quickly so that they can sell to their small business insureds. But there are many tools and workflows that can be built for that segment of broker, our small retail brokers, that we're never going to have time to build. And so I think there's a lot of depth there. I know it's a little bit of a maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but I mean, I think that bucket is very deep and there's a lot
Yeah.
there. So that's one that I'll flag. The second that I'll flag is, I mean, we've toyed around with the idea of doing strategic partnerships with a variety of, types of companies out there that are that have small business customers captive in some form or fashion, whether it's like a company like Square, or like Toast, or one of these kinds of businesses. I think people haven't really cracked that yet. And to your point, it's really like B2C in a sense, because I think the ideal state there is, what is that sort of embeddable? I mean, I know embedded insurance is a big topic, but like, what does that really look like? And does it look different depending on the niche or depending on the kind of partners that you're interested in serving? I think it probably does, based on at least everything I've learned over the last few years. So I think there's sub opportunities there to do interesting things. That's two. And then third, I think there are definitely new and emergent and different risks that are growing quickly. I mean, cyber is a great example of that, and there are many others, or at least there are some others. And so I think looking at those sort of niche, I mean, they're not niches really, but those markets that are growing fast, where the risk exposure is still not well defined or well understood yet, certainly is interesting.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting, and I think you're right. They're not exactly niche, the areas you mentioned, but they're still hugely um, underserved. And you kind of touched on embedded there as well, saying it's so wide and big. But some people, well, some people that I meet have met, events, etc., and some of them are investors, some of them are just have a real keen eye on insurtech, but they've got a very broad sense of where they're looking in terms of innovation. And
Yeah.
I think when people look at insurtechs, they just don't see particularly maybe investors, that are a bit more spread out in terms of their portfolio. They don't, like a SaaS model. A
Yeah.
SaaS model that could eat into any industry and exit for hundreds of billions, multi-billions. And you kind of look at an insurtech offering, and they just don't quite see. But I feel like, in order to, it'll never get to those kind of wild SaaS models that we've seen exit over the years for crazy amounts of money. But I think getting as close to that as possible, I do feel like there is an embedded model out there that's yet to come that can really, really operate like a SaaS model, just working its way through many, many different areas of insurance. But I don't know, have you kind of thought of that before? Or
Yeah, yeah. I think that world lives. Oh, let me say it differently. I think there's going to be things that exist that kind of approximate what you're describing. I don't know if it's too early or not. I'm not sure. I know for us, I mean, one thing that we tried to do early on was provide API access to our products. And that was
Yeah.
a tricky thing to do for a variety of reasons. I don't know if I mean, we didn't have a good sense of what sorts of partners would integrate with our API. We didn't know exactly what we wanted to be. Like being an API business is very different from being, what we are today. And the reason I bring that up is uh, providing access to these products programmatically by API or otherwise is definitely like kind of similar to what you're saying. And I don't know when the stripe for insurance will
Yeah.
exist. I know some people have definitely branded themselves that way. I don't know if anyone's really cracked that yet in the truest, like in the way that you think of when you think of that phrase.
Yeah.
Um, I think it could exist at some point. I think one thing that is important though that I want to mention here is deeply understanding the risks that you're taking on when you're offering this kind of product. Because I think one thing that's very different with insurance versus, let's say, payments as an example, since we're using the Stripe analogy, is um, although there is adverse selection and there's fraud and all this sorts of stuff, it's like a payment here is for the most part the same as a payment there. Whereas the risk here is definitely not at all the same as the risk there, depending on what kind of business you're serving and what kind of business you're you're offering insurance to. So I don't know. I guess this is a long way of saying I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. I do think that there's a lot more innovation to be had there. And I think an important and critical component of that, whatever that solution looks like, is going to be understanding how to accommodate and manage a very wide array of risks or being super focused on like whatever type of customer you want to serve.
Mm.
So that's how I think about it. Happy to be
Yeah.
wrong.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think anyone knows the answer, and I think like the plaid or stripe for insurance. I don't think we've definitely not quite seen it yet. I don't think, but yeah, it's just interesting. I feel like there's something out there that absolutely can change it. I feel like embedded is the model that can really achieve it, and disgustingly large scale, but yeah, I guess it's just a case of watch this space. I mean, you kind of mentioned you toyed around with APIs, and I'm kind of always interested to know what brokers and what people on the receiving side of these insurtechs were using prior to, APIs, of course, like EDIs or something maybe even less digital as that. But like, if you could go back, because you've been there since the beginning, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, close. I mean, James, a few others
It,
are earlier,
if
but close enough at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, like almost a founding member. Like, if knowing what you know today, if you could go back to the beginning, would the technology strategy be any different? Do you think,
Yeah,
or
that's a good question. Yeah, with the technology strategy being different, interesting. Yeah, I think so. It's a little tough, right? Because I think part of
yeah,
this journey has been figuring out what we're going to be when we grow up, and I think now we have that figured out. I can pretty confident saying that. But early on, just like any startup, you're kind of going through, you're finding some product market fit in a certain place. Then is that really the right strategy for us? Is it not? You're trying things out. I will say there are a couple of things I would do differently. I'll go back to the sort of way I described the mission. I mean, providing access to our brokers is key, and we
yeah,
realize how important that is. The one thing I would have done differently going backwards is invest a lot more time into thinking about how do we build these insurance products as um, effortlessly, let's put it that way, and efficiently as possible. I think we're trying to get really good at that now. We've spent some time getting really good at that, but I don't think it was obvious, like from the very, very beginning, that that's where we would focus. And looking backwards, I think I would. And there's a lot of complexity there. Like I kind of mentioned it earlier, but an insurance product is a combination of a few different things. It's a combination of taking in information, using that information to determine what you'll write risk-wise versus not. Then once you've decided you'll write a certain risk, how do you price it? And then how do you make sure that you expose the right coverages and the right sort of features to the broker to be able to choose on behalf of the insured? This all takes a lot of work to kind of orchestrate together. And it also takes work, human work, in spending time with our carrier partners, reinsurers, understanding what we can file versus not. So regulators, to be able to build the right product. And there are a lot of pieces of that puzzle that still are complicated and take more work than we would want. So investing more time there, I think, would be one thing. And the second thing I would say is I don't think it's kind of, again, one of those things where you're growing quickly enough where you don't know what's going to be important later on versus not. And so the other place that I kind of alluded to earlier is internal tools. I think making the lives of our revenue team, sales team, and the lives of our care members, our customer service team easier is just such an edge for us, for anyone who's working in insurance. Like I said, insurance is still and will be for some time a lot about relationships. And so empowering those relationships earlier on and building better tools earlier on, I think would have paid a lot of dividends now. But we got there, and we're definitely investing a lot of time there now. So I think those are two places where I think I would have maybe shifted the technical strategy a bit.
Interesting.
And I guess by virtue of that, the product strategy.
Yeah, like it's a tough question. I do appreciate, but it's always just interesting to sometimes look at that retrospectively, where you are now, because it's been such a journey. Like again, going back to your kind of personal journey, which we touched on earlier on the podcast, you very much came from that B2C consumer, adjacent consumer direct world, and then coming into Attune. I mean, one thing that I think has been quite constant in this conversation is you highlighting the complexities of innovation in the insurance space. How unbelievably difficult it is, and probably very stressful at times because of when you take the world that you came from, and clearly you're a guy that has a real bias for action, wants to get stuff done, but can zoom in, can zoom out. The complexities are inherent in the insurance industry while maintaining that focus on innovation. Because as you know, we're an executive search firm. I place CTOs. I mean, and most people that come on the podcast, of course, know that. And it's funny because when we get asked for maybe someone in go-to-market or sales, they'll always have to come from insurance. It's not quite the same for, technology leaders. So they can come from outside the world of insurance. But you speak to like a D2C guy, and you speak to them about, for example, an opportunity at Attune, a bit, it's like, oh, I'm not your guy.
Yeah.
I've not done that. It's not for me. Like, and I always
Yeah.
kind of push back on that and think, well, why not? Why can't you be the guy? Like,
Sure. Yeah.
like, how did that kind of? Seems like you really just took it and ran with it. You've seen what you've learned, and you can absolutely apply it, whether it's D2C, B2B2C, whatever it is. You can just apply what you know in any realm. Like, how have you managed to navigate that with, I wouldn't say ease, but it's, as you say, it's worked out.
It worked out, yeah. I think, yeah, ease isn't the word I'd use, but certainly it's worked out. I think a couple things. One, it depends on what your motive is. My
Yeah.
motive, as I was thinking about Attune, was, hey, here's this space that's really big, that has some parallels to other areas of fintech, which I might have had some exposure to versus not. And not just fintech, but has some parallels with things that I personally experienced outside of fintech, like I mentioned with my time at Facebook, and hasn't really been like penetrated by software or tech or that kind of thing, at least not in the way that we're imagining, or that, not recently. And so I think that motive was really important to me. And I saw this space that was $5 trillion of premium per year. I mean, I'm taking the biggest number, I can, and then you segmented it to commercial insurance in the US for small businesses that, well, that's still like $100 billion. That's a massive opportunity. And then you look at the users that are affected by that opportunity. And it's the coffee shop owner down the street. It's the medical office down the street. I mean, these are real people with real businesses who depend on their brokers to protect themselves from risk. So this is a long way of saying that I think the motive and why you're like that matters a lot to me. And I think if someone isn't excited by a big industry where there might be a lot of business complexity, but the impact can be pretty real, then that's okay. That's probably just not for them. But for me, that was important. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is the complexity is kind of a fun thing to unpack. I think there's a lot of opportunity behind the complexity, and there's a lot of, it kind of goes back to something I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of enjoyment that I get from making the process and making the complexity simpler to the degree possible. It's not that folks don't want it to be simple. It's not that there aren't opportunities to simplify things in insurance. It's just that there haven't been enough cracks at it yet, in my opinion. And now there are way more, and that's great. So I think that just unpacking some of the complexity there has been a lot of fun, which is, again, is not everyone's cup of tea.
Mm.
And then the third thing is sort of, I think if we just go to the technical challenges for a moment, I think the technical challenges are a bit different in our space. We're not a high scale, high volume sort of business in the way that, frankly, most things I've worked on prior to this have been. But there are different challenges. There are challenges about understanding our customer base as deeply as possible, and focusing on our customers in a very personalized way. That's a very interesting challenge. The risk for us getting things wrong is very high. I mean, relatively speaking. So I think that's its own kind of challenge, being as reliable as possible, is its own kind of technical challenge that has a unique, I would say, element in insurance. Let's say how do we innovate and go fast and ship quickly in a space where we are highly regulated? It matters whether or not we ship the wrong things. I mean, maybe I was saying the same thing two different ways, but I think that's its own kind of challenge. So how do we push the boundary with the constraints that we have in our industry? So I think those are a couple of the kinds of things that got me excited about this sort of challenge, and I think could get others excited, but it's not for everyone.
Well, next time I speak to CTO in a search and he asks why would I want to get into insurtech, I'll play him this
Yeah, fair enough.
of the podcast. Now that's
I hope I can give you a pithier answer at some point later, but that
you absolutely did. It's like, I mean, that kind of brings us to the end of that. But Azeem, just an amazing insight from you. Again, I really appreciate coming on. I totally agree with your last point. You know, it's an under the radar gem, the world of insurtech, and for people in the tech space, you know, it's I think you've just eloquently described it just perfectly. So a great point to finish on. But again, I do want to thank you for your time. I know you're a super busy man. It's a super busy time of the year for us all. And I wish you very happy holidays and time with the family.
Likewise, Gavin. Thank you so much, and very happy holidays to you and your family as well.
Thank you.